Hi everyone. While we're waiting for Chris to join us, let's do the technical formalities. Please introduce yourself, mention where you're from, what's your name, and if you can hear me and see me okay, just put plus plus in the comment section. Excellent. Hi guys, good to see you. Okay, well, while we're waiting, Chris is trying to figure out some technical difficulties to connect, and that's fine. He'll join us a little bit later. We do have a very interesting topic today, and I'll start the introductions, and then Chris will join in. We wanted to use this opportunity to talk about first some of the core competencies and characteristics that a risk leader may have in the current time, and we also want to talk a little bit about what are some of the things that have to be included in the risk strategy, and assuming that there should be a risk strategy. And risk strategy really is like an overarching high-level document that is designed to provide some sort of roadmap for the integration of risk management into core decision-making, core processes. Now, while I'll give you my thoughts on the subject, do share with me, what do you think are the core competencies or some of the best attributes that a risk leader should have? And risk leader being not an executive per se, but a risk manager, a senior risk manager, somebody who's heading the risk function, or somebody who has been given informal responsibility for leading the kind of the risk integration. In your mind, what are some of the most important attributes and competencies that a risk leader should have? What do you think? Well, Christian, it's a nice thought, being able to see the big picture. But what does that actually mean? Please expand on that. Jonathan, thanks. Courage, obviously, but is that something? Is there something more kind of tangible, more professional? I mean, we have to be courageous in any discipline, and I mean, if anything, there are professions that require much more courage than just risk management. Shady saying communication skills. Yes, most definitely. That's super important, because not just doing the analysis but also communicating that to the decision makers is absolutely important. Credibility, James, again, absolutely. Whoever you are talking to, you want that person to be credible, but really, like, more specifically to risk. Critical thinking, Osama, yes, very, very important. David, curiosity is actually is absolutely spot on, because you have to kind of continue digging even when the decision is already done. You have to still ask the questions. And Mark is absolutely spot on. Patience. good communication skills and problem solving, but patience more importantly, because we're really, as risk leaders, we're really kind of pushing against the grain, because we want people to make better quality decisions. We want people to stop and think about risks when making a decision. And that is not always easy, because people want to make quick decisions. They've already made up their mind. Some of the people have a lot of ego that they feel they know the answer, and it's you have to be super patient, continuously grinding and pushing the message that let's pause for a second before making this important budget or investment or operational decision or strategic decision, and let's consider the alternatives, and let's try and quantify some of the alternatives, because that's what risk management is all about. And I'll come back to some of the other really good answers. Now I see Chris is on the line as well with us. Chris, can you please join in with the video and the sound by clicking the camera and the microphone button on the top of your screen? Influencer, facilitator, Karthik is mentioning again. Absolutely right. It's probably a little bit more than that though. Like I think today we'll go into a little bit more in-depth detail. Ability to talk to all areas using their language, Jonathan is saying, is again completely spot on. And to me, this is a very interesting one, because we every single time we talk about risk management, we say you have to talk the business language, which seems obvious, but to me this is a huge deal, because by continuing to talk about the risks and needing to mitigate the risks and needing to assess the risks, we are already kind of breaking our own rule, because talking about risks is not a business conversation. Because instead, when I was the head of risk of the sovereign fund, when I needed to talk about risk, I was talking about this investment doesn't cost 100 million, it actually costs between 80 and 105. And you see what I've done? I've just communicated the volatility, the risk of a particular business decision, but I've done it in the term of that business decision. Or for example, I would say this budget is actually not very good, because there is a 70% probability that this budget will have a cash deficit by the end of the year. We may go bankrupt if we continue with this budget unless we change certain things. Again, you see what I've just done? I've actually had a conversation about risks. I've communicated the outcome of all of our risk analysis, but I've never mentioned the word risk. So this is a very interesting one. Respect, credibility, absolutely, Lisa, you're spot on. Angela is saying something interesting: ability to collaborate. And again, this is a big deal for me. This was a huge deal, because if we are considering risk management as being an integral part of business processes and decisions, that means it's less about us sitting in our offices and asking people to send us information so we can integrate it into a corporate risk register and then send it to the board or the executive. It's less about that. I mean, that is risk management one, still has to be done, but this is not where the real collaboration starts. The real collaboration is when you come to the CFO office and say, can we join forces to make the next budget more realistic by taking into account the risks associated with the key objectives at the time of budgeting? Can we integrate into your budgeting process, so when you budget, there's an extra step somewhere in the middle of the process before the approval saying do the risk analysis and change your budget based on that risk analysis. So collaboration is absolutely critical. Asama is raising an interesting one. Healthy skepticism, being skeptical to address the complacency and bias. And I think this is where where we get close to something that is personally interesting to me, is that, well, risk management, being a risk leader, is all about the softer things that you have to know. I mean, that's obvious, and everything that you guys said is very important. But there's also the kind of, that's really, if you allow me the analogy, that's really the tip of the iceberg. But there's the whole thing underneath the water that is usually not talked about, and I think this is what we wanted to um, we wanted to discuss today. And sorry guys, you can see my eyes are shifting from one screen to another. Now Chris has been trying to get in all this time into the webinar, and to stop his pain of trying to deal with Google Chrome issues. He's trying to connect once again right now. If that doesn't work, we will reschedule and have our joint conversation with him another time. In the meantime, I'll just share some of so you don't feel you've wasted your time. I'll share some very important things with you today, and then we can have like a proper conversation again with Chris at the later stage. I mean, fingers crossed he'll be able to connect. But let's have at least my part of the conversation with you now, and then I'll interview Chris about what he wanted to say at the later stage, and I'll make sure everyone who signed up for this webinar will get either a recording or we will do another live session. So apologies for the technology side of today. So I wanted to come back to something that Asama just said. Being able to understand, appreciate, see, and deal with cognitive biases, which I think is actually a pretty big deal that we don't usually talk about when we think about risk leadership and some of the competencies. And I mean, more than a dozen of you responded with the comments. So thank you very much for your comments with the ideas. But what is interesting is most of the things that I have in my mind have not been mentioned. So this means at least we can add value to one another by having this conversation. Even though I wrote at least 2 or 3 articles on this subject already. Here are 5 things that I personally feel that a risk leader should have. And I'll start with the easier ones, and I'll go towards the more complex ones. And the easiest one of all, which I think most senior people in risk positions have got nailed down, is understanding the laws, legislation, and standards associated with risk management. So knowing ISO 31000 and using it to your advantage to push different messages, to sell risk management internally, knowing the law in your country that has a mention towards better risk management. For example, the corporation law in Russia has just changed, and now it is compulsory to have risk management, which is a wonderful news for all risk managers, because we now have a legal basis for doing whatever we were doing all the time. I mean, we've been doing this for a decade, if not longer. I mean, longer in many companies, but now there is a legal requirement. So knowing those little clauses in different legislations, different laws, is important. And another thing that was very important for me as the sovereign fund head of risk is that there are associations. For example, there is a European Private Equity and Venture Capital Association that publishes its own guidelines, or there is a association of sovereign funds that have published Santiago Principles, and that basically outlines all the good practices that you should consider in your specific industry. And surprise, surprise, one of them is risk management. So again, knowing all those wonderful things where risk is mentioned is super important, because selling risk management internally is not an easy job, and you have to have the arguments, not just you feel it's good for business, but it's either a law, or everybody else in the industry is doing it, or there is some sort of international standard, ISO 31000 being the easy one because it's adopted in 70 something countries. So that's number one. And again, this is the easiest one. Like, this doesn't take too much creativity. The second one, and I do want, in the comments section, do write whether you agree, disagree, whether you would add something, whether you think some other guideline is super useful and that helped you sell risk management better. So that's number one. Number two. Number two is about communications, softer skills, negotiations, facilitation, being a good listener, courage, and everything else you can think of under the sun, under the umbrella of soft skills. That is important. I mean, especially the more senior the risk person is, the more important it is, because you have to deal with people, and you have to appreciate change management, you have to appreciate communication, you have to appreciate negotiations, conflict resolution. Now, all of those skills are very, very important, because as you integrate into decisions, you will make somebody's lives difficult, because you will expose the risks that they've been silently taking all this time and hiding from everybody in the organization. You will propose, and you will drive certain changes to, let's change how we budget, let's change how we make investment decisions, let's change how we discuss strategic initiatives, let's change how we deal with innovation. Like, you will, as the risk leader, you usually come up with a lot of those things, and softer skills, again, are super important. That's number two. Write in the comments if you think, if you agree, or if there's something else to it. Oh, I'm seeing Chris. You're almost on. You've turned the screen share. That's number two. I will continue while Chris is trying to figure out how to connect to us. Turn the camera and the microphone on the top next to the. It's the left and the second left button. So that's number two. Number three. This is where it gets interesting, super interesting for me, because number three is what Osama has mentioned and what it kind of triggered it in my mind. And I think this is one of the things that people are already beginning to forget. And yet it is absolutely important. Number three is understanding all the research, or at least the most important research, that has been done since 1970s, and it is under the umbrella called risk perception. There's a whole field of study called risk perception. And what this basically means is that scientists in neuroeconomics, in economics, in behavioral economics have been studying how people see, perceive, and behave under uncertain situations. And not only they've been doing that, they've actually got 2 Nobel Prizes in economics. In 2002, Vernon Smith and Daniel Kahneman, and in 2017, I forgot Richard Thaler. I keep forgetting his name because I'm not a huge fan of his work. But there's been 2 Nobel Prizes in economics. There's a whole field of study. I mean, if you just Google risk perception, it will take you to the Wikipedia page, which has a list of all the different research key findings. And it's one of those things where it's a small ball, and as you start unraveling it, you will realize that this has huge implications on the risk profession. For example, there are scientific, medical even, explanations why people do not see risks. So just telling people to appreciate risks when making decisions is guaranteed to fail. There are also reasons why people unable medical reasons, deep inside our brain, we're all the same. Reasons why people do not appreciate probability. So we overestimate our ability and the effectiveness of controls and underestimate the possibility of bad things happening. So we constantly misjudge the most important, life or death matters, and especially in business, all the operational financial risks, we constantly misjudge them. So asking people to rank risks in terms of likelihood and consequence using the 5 by 5, colorful scales that you've prepared for them is guaranteed to lead to misleading and pretty much useless results. There's this whole baggage of study which basically says don't do it. And here's another fascinating one. This is the one I love. Our risk perception changes based on our ability to switch from system 1 to system 2 thinking, and that requires a lot of sugar or glucose in our blood. That means if you feel hungry, you are unable to see and understand risks. That means that if you do a risk workshop before lunch or at the end of the day, you're guaranteed to get useless, misleading results. So this is number 3 for me. This whole field of study is fascinating. It has huge implications for the risk profession. And there are more than 200 different cognitive biases. They kind of constantly get on and off um, the kind of the bandwagon, because some of them get disproved, others get added. In general, don't believe everything you read, because there is another school of thought that kind of questions some of the biases that have been discovered. So it's not all it's not all soft and cuddly. You have to use critical thinking when you read the information. And one of the things that, for example, Nassim Taleb argues is that cognitive biases explain well the behavior of individuals in certain situations, but they don't work as well when you're trying to explain the behavior of large complex groups or of people. So again, write in the comments what you think, or let's make it fun. Write in the comments what's your favorite cognitive bias, and I have like a dozen of mine, which is, by the way, this is actually, I'm trying to keep it light, but in reality this is a very serious test, because if you don't have a favorite cognitive bias, or if it's one of those bullshit biases, unconscious bias that BBC or CNN writes about, um, then you have a real problem. Because as the risk manager, you have to know at least like 20 of them by heart, because they have a huge implication on everything we do in risk. There is a reason why we have to use, bow tie diagrams, for example, for certain risks. And we have to use bow tie diagrams in a certain way to switch on system 2 thinking. So here's the test for you. What's your favorite cognitive bias? Osama, I'm waiting for your favorite cognitive bias. Do write in the comments. So this is number 3 for me. Number 3 for me. Number 4, and this is where it's getting more difficult. I've promised you the kind of the pyramid of the easiest one to the most difficult one. So number 4 is difficult, and to me, number 4, it's an that's too easy. Give me something amazing. Number 4 is decision science and probability theory. This is similar to the risk perception. Unbeknown to us in the risk profession, which is a little bit embarrassing, but really kind of, it's better late than never, I guess. Over the last 50 to 70 years, parallel to the risk management world, there has been a lot of research in decision science and probability theory. And some of the findings, again, those are kind of the complementary fields of risk management. In fact, my argument is, without appreciating the probability theory and the decision science, you probably won't be able to be a good risk manager, or well-rounded risk manager. You'll be focused towards more qualitative stuff that immediately falls into all the cognitive biases, and is probably going to lead to really bad decisions for the company, and going to lose the company a lot of money. But this is where it's kind of fascinating. Parallel to us in the risk management space, in the kind of non-financial financial services, the probability theory and the decision science have been developing amazing tools. And what is important is that I think the risk community is now beginning to appreciate and understand that, and we're circling back. Because if you read the 2018 ISO 31000, you would realize that it kind of always was, but now it's explicit. Risk management is not about managing risks for the sake of managing risks. Risk management is about making better business decisions and performing better business activities with risks in mind. And in fact, the risk management is, I think, coordinated activities to manage organization with regard to risk, which is how you basically do your work as long as you consider risks. And that's good risk management. So number 4 for me is understanding and researching and reading. And there are wonderful books, and by the end of this webinar, I'll share with you a link with my favorite 12 risk management books that go into the all those 5 things that I will discuss today. So number 4, decision science, probability theory. There's absolutely no way around it, unfortunately. For example, the probability theory, one of the key outcomes and the key implications for us in the risk community is that multiplying single value consequence and single value probability, or adding consequence and probability, doesn't matter, makes no mathematical sense whatsoever. In fact, it is so ridiculous that a 16-year-old student in school would never do it. This is beyond, and I don't really want to offend anyone, even though I do every single day with my blog, but it's coincidental, I would like to think. Multiplying probability and consequence, or impact, or likelihood, you can call it whatever, is absolutely stupid. It has nothing to do with proper math. It's insane. It's borderline insane. And if you don't believe me, in a week's time, I'm running another webinar with David Vossi, who is one of the kind of the godfathers of risk analysis, and his books are the textbooks for risk analysis global. And he'll talk about some of those things. It is absolutely insane what we do in risk management. The whole idea of a risk register, which captures the likelihoods, the consequences, and the risk levels, and then how we map it out on the heat map, is just beyond. It's literally beyond insane. It's just you might as well just draw a picture, like a big word, lie. Thanks, Osama. I know you feel the same way as I do. But anyway, I don't want to deviate, because number 4 in my kind of countdown of easiest to most difficult competencies that a risk leader should have is appreciation for decision science and probability theory. And while we can't all be experts, I mean, you can do exactly the same what I did. I have a very good appreciation. I have a 2nd degree in statistics, but I mean, it's been ages since I'd done any proper risk analysis and modeling, so I just hired someone in my team. I knew what he had to do. I knew how to interpret the results. I knew how to ask the right questions. But for all the manual work, I just had someone to do it. And anyone with the CFA can do, proper risk analysis, because that's what they teach them. Literally any student from statistical classes can do proper risk analysis, because it's the most basic stuff that they teach. I mean, the kind of tools we use in non-financial risk management in corporate world is kindergarten stuff, like literally kindergarten stuff. So number 4 for me is not forgetting the basics of decision science and probability theory. Because once you open a textbook on decision science, you will have immediate answers on how to integrate into decision making, because it already explains to you that this is a 7-step decision making process, and step number 3 is risk analysis. It's already there. Like, all the answers on how to implement ISO 31000 are already in good books, and I'll share with you my personal favorite 12 books on anything to do with risk, and all those four things. And the same with probability theory. You are concerned about opportunities and threats. You want to understand inherent residual. You want to show different. You want to see how risks affect an objective. You want to see how risks are correlated, and how more than a single risk affects a budget or a project schedule or a decision, or an overall company strategic objective. Well, probability theory has all the answers. We have all the tools, and we've had them for more than 50 years. So there's really no excuse, even though you may be thinking of one excuse right now, because that's how human brain works. We come up with excuses for anything we don't like. Um, but the reality is, I mean, I think we've been doing this long enough. The reality is, there's absolutely no way around it. You have to, as the risk professional, you have to invest your time in understanding, learning, and getting to be familiar with decision science and probability theory. So that's number 4. And number 5, the hardest one, and again, this is the hardest one for all. This is actually understanding and appreciating the industry that you're working on. And I mean, to me, this is what it was. Like, one of my friends, she's the head of risk of one of the manufacturing companies. As she became a head of risk of the manufacturing company, she literally went to evening classes to get a degree in engineering. Because to be a risk manager in the company that makes decisions, and if you want to integrate into decision making, you have to appreciate the industry that you're working on. For example, when I was the head of risk of the sovereign fund, I started reading a lot on the investment industry, on venture capital, on private equity, and going to all the training sessions that our company had to learn the basic of investments, to make sure I appreciated the industry. So to my mind, that's the most difficult one. And again, there's a shortcut. You don't have to learn everything yourself. You just have to hire someone from the actual company to your risk department. So, for example, if you're working as the risk manager in a pharmaceutical company, you really want somebody with a scientific degree who appreciates how molecules are made. These are my 5. What else? What else have I missed? Tell me in the comment section. What else do you think needs to be added? And I only see 2 cognitive biases in the comment section. That's not good enough. You should know that. I mean, that kind of shows me that the rest of you are not sure what your favorite cognitive bias is, and that means we have to invest in our research and education. Okay, so here's the first link. This is a new link, because these are all completely free resources. And thank you very much, James, for making this request. Let me summarize the 5 key competencies, going from easiest to hardest. Easiest, number 1, knowing the standards, guidelines, laws, regulations, anything that mentions the word risk in your country, in your industry, because you will need that to sell risk management in-house. You need to know the kind of the basis, the foundations. Number 2 is all the soft skills: facilitation, coordination, change management, negotiations, patience, courage. All of those things are super important, and you have to use that. Number 3, risk perception, neuroeconomics, behavioral economics, and basically the science around how the human brain works what is system 1, system 2 thinking, and why this matters for the risk management. Because I mean, that's a huge deal. That's a huge deal for the risk management. Number 4, decision science, and probability theory. So there's a lot of research. We do not have to. I mean, I appreciate consultants. That's how they make money. Every year they come up with the new rubbish and they sell it under the new package. All the answers have been available for at least 50 years. All the answers we as risk managers need have been available for at least 50 years. Just literally open any good textbook on decision making or probability theory, all the tools, all the applications, all the examples, how to integrate into decision making. I mean, it's a never-ending quest. It's so easy. You just have to do the homework. And I'll share with you the 2 resources that I do for my homework. Number 5, you have to understand the industry. You have to understand the nature of the business. Working in a pharmaceutical company, you need to understand how molecules are made, to be able to integrate, and how new drugs are registered, and why it costs at least $1 million to register a new drug, and again, million in Russian currency, and so on. You have to know all those things to appreciate it. So that's my list of number 5. Belkis is asking, do we have a software tools to apply the solid probability analysis? Well, funny you mentioned that. Of course we do. And we've had that, again, for years. But more importantly, the computers are now advanced enough that they can handle the software. So now my phone has enough power to run a simulation and use proper risk analysis. I mean, technically speaking, you can do anything in Excel. There's Excel, or there's another free one called Analytica if you want to use graphical decision making. So yes, we have the software, but even better, the software is now free. So here's the link that I've mentioned. You see my name is kind of highlighted in light blue in the comments section. Let me just let me just make this visible to everyone. Here's the first link. This is the link of absolutely free resources where I have collected, this is what I've been using for years. There's a textbook from CIA on cognitive biases. It's free. It's amazing. Yes, this is just how serious this is. CIA have been doing research on how people make decisions under uncertainty for at least 50 years. And they've actually published a lot of their work. It's available for anyone, except in countries where CIA website is blocked. I mean, I've come across that as well. But it's available to everyone. It's amazing. It's free. And I've just been, a couple of months ago now, I've been very fortunate to participate in a risk training in Canada that RIMS, the Risk Management Institute, the US Institute, has organized, and they've invited a CIA ex-analyst and a very successful banker to run this seminar. And the key takeaway was basically CIA hires the smartest people they can find and then forbids them from making intuitive decisions, forces them to use an algorithm. And this is what risk management is all about. Risk management is an algorithm that you have to use before making a decision, because if you don't use an algorithm, there's a very high probability you will make a bad decision. So yes, there are software, yes, there are free books, and this is the link. Thank you very much. SIPMath is something that Sam Savage has developed, and is an amazing free tool that integrates and just expands the functionality of native functionality of Excel. And the beauty of SIPMath, I mean, it's an amazing tool in so many ways. But one of the beauties, because it actually uses Excel's own functionality, it takes seconds to perform thousands of simulations. And if you don't want to figure out everything, how to do it manually by using formulas and really kind of getting into it, there is a simpler version, Model Risk, that David Vossi has developed is also free with limited functionality, but that limited functionality is more than enough for most users in the world. So, I mean, I'm actually amazed those two pieces of software, both of which I mentioned in my article. I am amazed that those things are not used more because they're absolutely brilliant. And hat off to the people who are developing it, to both David and Sam Savage. Both David's book and Sam Savage's book, Fooled by what was Sam Savage's book? Sorry, I had a mental blank. Let me just check that. In the meantime, I'm sending you the second link, which is all the risk management books that personally made huge impact on my career. And this is like the 5 things that I've talked to you about: decision science, probability theory, cognitive biases. All of those books are there. So those are the things that you would highly benefit from if you've read them. The Flow of Averages, of course, is the name of the Sam's book. So here's the second link. What else? What else would you add? What's your favorite risk management? What's your favorite risk management book? Well, thank you very much. Some of you may know, some of you may not know. I have written a risk management book in 2016, and I made it available completely free. It's also in that link with all the other books. It's the last one. I mean, it is the most popular free risk management book in the world. It has been downloaded more like 60,000 times. So if you haven't read it, I mean, I guess I encourage you to read it, because it's a really good read. It's very simple read, and it's it's #1 in Google. The link for model risk, not a problem. Here's the link to model risk. And again, free. The world is an amazing place. If you just ask the right questions, everything is there. I totally agree with FAIR as the good read for cyber risk. And Belkis is asking, how do you see the integration of cybersecurity to the risk analysis? Well, I see it kind of the other way around. By the way, me and Osama had a wonderful chat about that, and it's available on the Risk Academy channel on YouTube. Here's the link. By all means, rewatch that chat. I did think I said something very interesting in that conversation with Osama, is that I see cyber security or cyber risk is really just the kind of the flavor of the month. Next year it will be something else. In 3 years it will be something else. It's exactly the same like foreign exchange was 5, 10, 20 years ago. Soon we will not have a separate methodology for cyber risk. We will not have to quantify cyber risks for the sake of quantifying cyber risks. Soon, we will just, cyber or digital or anything you can call it will be yet another consideration when we make a decision. So for example, you're about to sign off a contract, and you will have to pause and do the risk analysis and think about, well, what are the digital risks associated with that decision? What are the digital risks associated with option A? What are the digital risks associated with option B? The all the other books, Douglas Hubbard, again, absolutely spot on. And if you want to hear some of the most amazing risk managers in the world speak, is Sam Savage is actually having a conference in US, and I mean, I'm extremely grateful that I was allowed to participate in that and present my business case at that conference. But Douglas Hubbard is going to be there. Sam Savage is going to be there, and many others, absolutely amazing risk managers. So I'll just send you the link to that. Shadi is asking, what is the name of your book? Well, that's really easy. Just Google free risk management book, and it's #1. That's just me being cocky, but in reality, the book is called The Guide to Effective Risk Management, and here's the link. I'm not going to be. I don't want to be a dick about it, but really, I mean, it's the #1 free risk management book on the planet. So that's really nice. Risk Savvy, absolutely one of my favorites. Really good book. What else? What other books? Because before we go today, I really wanted to share with you the risk strategy, because I did some work on the risk strategy, and I have my answer. But let's and we'll hear Chris Mandel's answer a little bit later when I do an interview with him. What are your priorities? What would you include in the risk strategy? If you had to do a risk strategy for an organization, what are some of the key? And risk strategy basically mean like an action plan. This is an action plan, a document with an action plan of what steps or projects or activities or initiatives you're planning to do in the year's time to make sure risk management is properly integrated. So write your comments. What do you think is useful? What should be included in the risk strategy? And in the meantime, I'll share with you my 4 things. Thing #1, or the bucket #1, is risk management 1. Now, if you don't know what risk management 1 is, that's the little idea some people came up, and I helped to spread it. Is risk management is really divided into 2 things. One you do for someone else, for a regulator, for a board, for an executive, for somebody external, for insurance company, for banks. And risk management 2, which is something you do for the executives to help them make better informed decisions. So bucket #1 in the risk strategy is risk management 1. Risk management 1 basically means you have to have something about risk management in the annual report. You probably have to have a risk management policy. You may, depending on how anal your external auditor is, you may have to have a risk appetite statement, even though it's the dumbest thing possible. You may have to have it. You may have to have a risk management framework document. Again, depends on how. No standard says that you should, and unlikely that there's a law in your country that says that you should. But external auditors, they're usually pain in the ass, and they expect you to have certain things. And same with rating agencies like S&P, Moody's. They all expect certain things. They have a checklist, and they don't care if it makes no sense. They just ask you. You may have a risk management framework. You may have to generate some sort of regular risk report for the board. Again, I don't understand why anyone in their right state of mind would, because there are so many much better ways to communicate risks. but you may have to be forced to do it. So risk management one is basically when somebody is forcing you to do something, you just do it as quickly as possible. You just do it as quickly and as painlessly as possible. Do it yourself if you can. Do not waste management's time on the discussions, negotiations. Just do quick and dirty. As long as it looks right, it doesn't matter, because risk management one is all window dressing. It's a facade. It's not a real risk management. So that's number one. And unfortunately, you have to do it because you can't really get away from doing all those things, unless you are like me and you wanted to start a revolution and you want to have that discussion with the chair of the board saying, we will not do a risk report anymore because here is a better way. We can integrate risk management into the usual performance report, and then the CEO or the CFO will present all of the information combined in a single graph, and you don't have to have a separate risk report. Unless you kind of want to have that discussion, then you will be forced to continue doing some of those silly things, and that's fine. The key with risk management one is do it as quickly as possible, because the problem is, for most people, risk management one activities, that are meaningless, that have absolutely no impact on anything, that don't have any connection to the actual decision making, risk managers spend months doing it, weeks, months, doing risk workshops, discussing risks in terms of, doing the inherent risks and then doing the residual risk. And that's just, I think that's crazy. Bucket number two is basically risk management two. So for risk management two, you actually have to take a completely different approach. Instead of creating something for the sake of risk, creating documents that have risk in the title, you have to change the way existing policies and procedures are written. And you have to change how the procurement procedure looks like. So you change the procurement process to make sure risks are properly accounted for and they impact on the procurement decisions. You have to change the investment policy, investment guidelines. You have to change the templates, how investments are done, to make sure risk is becoming a part of it. So that's like a whole, that's literally 70% of the time. Like, that's a huge piece of work that is never ending. This will keep you exercised, and fun for years. That's number two. And I'm not gonna go into too much detail because A, the time is running out, and B, I am gonna send you a link where I have mapped out all of this in great detail, for you to kind of copy and paste, and everything's free because that's what I like doing. Now, bucket number three is risk culture. People are not gonna start thinking about risks by themselves. You have to either nudge them, you have to give them, create the environment where it's okay to discuss risks. You have to integrate risk roles and responsibilities into the position descriptions, into the job descriptions, into committee charters. You have to provide people with competency training. You have to test the competencies. You have to test the culture from time to time. Anyway, there's a whole plethora of work under the umbrella of risk culture. And again, I have a lot of information dedicated to that, so I'll share that with you as well. And then the fourth bucket of activities is developing the risk management team. So actually allocating time to learn the decision science, learn the probability theory, learn the new software, the new free software. Go to training to understand how the industry works. Go to that oil and gas training that you're working on, or go to that engineering training that will help your team to be able to better communicate with the executives about the risks that they're seeing as part of the decision making. So those are the kind of the four buckets. And just for the convenience, I have created this little mind map, which basically maps out these are the four big buckets, and then there are individual things that you can do under each bucket. Again, this has been downloaded like 4,000 or 5,000 times, so by all means use it. It's there. I mean, if you haven't got the memo, the Risk Academy blog has a lot of free information. 4,380 times it has been downloaded so far. So you're welcome. And not only it's there for you, if you think something should be added or something is missing, by all means, write to me, and I'm more than happy to update it. And in fact, maybe one day I'll make a public version where we can all update it simultaneously in real life, in real time, I mean. So these are the two things that I wanted to really to talk to you about today. And I mean, I was very, very hopeful that Chris would kind of contribute a lot to that, because he has a very interesting perspective on things. And so we will do a separate event on, or I'll just record a conversation with him and share it with everyone who signed up for the webinar. 5 competencies: standards, laws and regulations, soft skills, neuroscience, cognitive biases, decision science, probability theory, and knowing the industry. And risk strategy should have 4 things: risk management 1 sorted, risk management 2 sorted, risk culture sorted, and don't forget about yourself. Develop the risk management team, because they have to grow with the business. Those are all the things that I want to talk about. If you have any more questions or any more thoughts, or just anything you want to share, please write in the comments section, right now. In the meantime, I'll just respond to some of the comments that I haven't responded. Mark, you're absolutely right. I mean, risk managers don't appreciate that. Understanding the cognitive biases and understanding how human brain works is so powerful that you can almost immediately tell if somebody is lying to you or they're just confused about something. People genuinely do not see risks, or they completely misjudge the risks, or they have no idea what to do, how to mitigate risks, even though the answers are always there. People just, our brain has to be switched on to a different kind of critical thinking that A, requires a lot of sugar, and B, requires a lot of probing to switch on to that kind of system 2 thinking. Well, if you don't understand that, you will believe what people tell you. In fact, it's guaranteed that what people tell you in the first instance is probably going to be a lie. Not that they want to lie to you, but they're just genuinely confused. Shadi, thank you. I appreciate you being part of this. Peter is actually asking a very, very good question. And simple answer is, every executive is different, so God knows how to deal with that particular one that that you're thinking about. But here's what I've done, and this is very interesting. We had 5 executives, and one of the executives was kind of the sponsor for risk management, and he was the chair of my risk committee. He was basically like my closest ally and friend, and we had a saying with him that we integrated risk management not with, but despite some of the other executives. This basically means that there are some people that are beyond help, and you actually, I mean, it's part of the it's part of the risk management expertise to quickly realize whether someone is genuinely wanting to know more, or they're actually so clever that they've realized how dangerous risk management is to them, and now they just pretend that they don't understand. So you have to very quickly realize that and not waste your time on them. So basically what I've done is, for every executive that literally refused, just said, get lost, risk management, every single time they would come up with new excuses why risk management didn't work for their specific decisions, their specific investments, their specific business processes. So what I've done is, for every executive that was clearly against and just not going to learn, and it was hopeless for that specific purpose of risk management, I found his junior director, or even 2 levels below, who would appreciate risk management. And it was so good working with them, because once people already kind of done all the risk analysis, then the executive just goes like, okay, yeah, fair enough. We would do everything in the background and bring him the results of the risk analysis and already kind of change the decision before it even gets to him. So the risks are incorporated, so he didn't even realize all the proper risk analysis taking place. So that's how I've done it, is speak to every executive. If you see it's pointless, just give up and work with somebody underneath them, because there are always good people. Samuel is asking, they seem well. I agree with the executives, and I agree with your comment as well. Executives see risk as a bad negative thing. Well, that's our fault, our risk professional fault, is because when you use the only reason why they associate risk with negative, with bad things, is because we used bad tools to do risk analysis. Because when you use proper tools, for example, when you use either a decision tree or a sensitivity analysis or a scenario analysis or a Monte Carlo simulation, instead of bad risks or risk radar, what you show is you have budget 2.0 or project schedule 2.0, and you come to the executives and you say, well, you promised that this project will be finished in 6 months, but in fact our analysis shows that it will be finished somewhere between 9 and 12 months, so you are from 3 to 6 months off. And don't overcommit unless you take care of all those risks. So you're actually being very, very helpful to them by showing how risks affect their decision. For example, when I did the risk analysis on the budget that was about to be taken to the government for approval, the probability of default was like 99%. And I said, well, don't take that to the government. Make adjustments to your assumptions first. Lower your appetite for investment activity, and do another revision, and then take that revision to the government, because that will probably be approved much easier. And that was that was helpful to the business. So yes, there is a negative stigma about risk management, but I think it's partially our fault because we actually used bad tools to communicate risk in the first place. um, James is asking a very serious question. Good risk management is a threat to executives who thrive by management by heroics. Absolutely true. And it's one part of thing. It's good when it's heroics, but when you're working in a country where corruption exists and spreads everywhere, it takes about 5 seconds for an executive to realize what a threat risk management is to all their corrupt and dodgy practices. And business processes are confusing and inconsistent, usually for a reason. So yes, as a good risk manager, you very quickly become aware of some of the scariest things you can think of in the corporate world, which was very tough for me. So my general rule was always have a lot of friends, because internal auditors, internal control, legal, finance, find find friends who share kind of your passion for better decision making, because otherwise you can just go insane. Shady is asking, what are my thoughts on risk management and internal under the same director? My simple answer is, for the first 3 years in my risk career, I was under the same umbrella and I loved it. I couldn't care less about conflict of interest. I think conflict of interest is absolute rubbish, because until the internal audit is getting his salary from someone than CEO, then he can talk about conflict of interest. Other than that, it's just a joke. If his salary is paid by the CEO, then forget about conflict of interest. So I think it's an amazing opportunity. It's an amazing opportunity that Institute of Internal Auditors ruined for us by coming up with a rubbish model like 3 lines of defense. Unfortunately, it was the best time of my career working together with internal audit, because for my risk analysis, for every decision, I needed a lot of ammunition, and internal audit was the best place for that ammunition. So I was literally sitting in my office, head of internal audit, head of internal control, and head of compliance on the other side. So I would just talk to 3 people. Within 5 minutes, I knew everything I needed to know about a particular project or a particular team, and that gave me a lot of power to do proper risk analysis. Not just like moral power, but it literally gave me numbers to plug into the models to calculate the risk exposure. So that worked really, really well. I I would highly encourage it, because the little conflict of interest that exists, I mean, anyway, it's a whole separate discussion. Conflict of interest between risk and internal audit is literally the least of the problems that internal audit has to worry about. Samuel feels those 2 roles should be kept at arm's length. Well, I found personal experience, again, this is against everything you will ever read on internal audit and risk, but I personally found the closer they are, the better the risk analysis, and the better the internal audit, because I gave them a lot of ammunition as well for their all their audits. So it was the best. It was the best relationship ever. Finally, once I resigned as the head of risk, and a good friend of mine and a colleague has become the new head of risk, and he had to separate from internal audit because the law kind of changed, and now it required the government agencies to have separate risk and audit. He lost that daily exchange of information, and that had a pretty significant impact on the quality of his work, which is disappointing. So even though they're friends, yes, they collaborate, and they're all about engaging and everything else, just the fact that you sit in different business units apparently makes a difference. Yes, sir, I agree. Many countries are just beginning the risk journey, which is great. I mean, you don't, in Latin America, you're lucky. In Central America, you're lucky. You don't have to make the same mistakes we've been making in US, Europe, and Australia for decades. You know, do not use heat maps for risk management. Here's a wonderful takeaway. It took us bloody 20 years to realize that, but apparently it's that simple. And do not have a separate risk management process. Do not have an enterprise-wide risk register. Um, so there's a little life mysteries. It just takes decades to figure it out. Thank you guys for all the positive feedback. Dwayne is right. IAEA is currently reviewing the model, although the president of IAEA indicated that it's not going to be a radical change, and I mean, it's unlikely they will do anything truly groundbreaking with it, but fingers crossed. If you have any more questions, I thank you very much for your time, and I again apologize for the technical difficulties, because I really I didn't just want it to be a one-man show, but I promise we'll somehow find a way to communicate what Chris had to say to you as well. Because interestingly, I mean, we agree on many things with Chris, and we actually disagree on quite a few as well. So it will be interesting for you to kind of see the alternative point of view. Which is ironic, because usually my view is alternative to the mainstream. But anyway, if there's anything else I can share with you, because there's an abundance of free risk management resources. Thank you, guys. Any more questions? I'll stay online for a minute or so longer. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to respond to you. Thank you, everyone. See you in next webinars.